Society can view creativity as a bit of a luxury, as though it's something you do when you're done with your important stuff, in your spare time, if you're good at it. And yet it means something to people. For some, it's like taking dictation from a divine source where you're just the vessel.
He had simply written down music already finished in his head.
And for others, it's a way to process and respond to what life's throwing at you.
I don't want to be here, but my ex won't take me back, so my broken ass is here, small talking over apps.
However you look at it, creativity plays a huge role in our lives. I'd like to spotlight this quote from Neil Gaiman from his book View from the Cheap Seats, which is an absolute favorite. It reads, "When things get tough, this is what you should do. Make good art." I'm serious. Husband runs off with a politician? Make good art. IRS on your trail? Make good art. Cat exploded? Make good art. Someone on the internet thinks what you do is stupid and all done before? Make good art. I think it fits really well into our discussion today. Bit of an asterisk, creativity here does not exclusively mean making art. Essentially, we're just talking about injecting your personality and your flair into something, making it yours. Whether that's how you dress, how you talk, how you parent, doesn't matter. Essentially just doing things your way.
I want you to find your own walk right now. Your own way of striding, pacing, whether it's proud, whether it's silly, anything.
And to illustrate, we're going to be looking at a wonderful myth from Mexico, La Llorona, or the Weeping Woman. This harrowing tale falls under the category of cautionary. It asks us to pay close attention to its subtle messages so as not to repeat the fate of our nameless heroine. But for our intents and purposes, we're going to call her Isabel throughout our discussions. There are two versions of this story, and we're going to look at both. This is Fruit of the Gods. The story goes thus. So there's this rich nobleman, let's call him Hector Moneybags, and he's courting Isabel. Now Isabel's this remarkable woman with a real zest for life, and a faraway look in her eyes that suggests adventure. Her only flaw is that she's poor. I'd like to imagine that this is how the courtship went.
I fought against my better judgment, my family's expectation, the inferiority of your birth, my rank, and circumstance, all these things, and I'm willing to put them aside and ask you to end my agony. I love you.
Now, Mr. Moneybags makes all kinds of grand promises and gestures to show her that he is the commitment
type. Won't you give me a chance, baby?
She resists his advances at first, but after a lot of badgering, she softens her initial skepticism and goes out with him. Things go well at first. They even have 2 children, 2 boys. But he refuses to marry her. No matter how hard she argues and pleads with him, he just won't put a ring on her. And then one day he tells her he's going to Spain to marry a rich woman who's more suited for his stature. And what's worse, he's taking the boys with him.
I want a divorce and I want the kids. Challenge me.
Now, things were already bubbling under the surface for a while now. There's been this frustration that's been building, but this was the breaking point. It's one thing to be denied something that she wanted, marriage, but to have something of hers taken away? Overwhelmed with anger and grief, Isabel goes mad. Now listen, we're not talking about get me my smelling salts, I need a fainting couch, die of heartache madness. We're talking about a cornered animal who feels like she has no other card to play, so she lashes all the way out. She claws at him, she rips his hair and then her own, a lot of screaming. Then she takes her boys to the river and drowns them, where she dies herself. Her soul immediately ascends to heaven, where she's told she's welcome because she suffered. Catholics love their suffering. But here's the catch. She cannot enter until she finds the souls of her sons. So there she is, the weeping woman, eternally raking and searching the river for what was lost. In the alternative version of the story, Mr. Moneybags was not a social climber. He was a businessman. In this version, he does marry her, and he builds a factory over the river. The pollution from the factory infects the river, which poisons Isabel and her sons, who are born deformed. All of this is too much for Hector, who decides to just book it and leave them. Isabel goes mad again and drowns her boys so that they don't suffer. And then same deal with heaven. No boys, no entry. Okay, so now that we've covered the story, let's discuss the symbols. Let's dissect what each element means and how it relates back to us. Now, I want to say that a lot of the symbols in our discussion today comes to us from the book Women Who Run with Wolves. Absolute recommend for anyone feeling stuck and starting the spiritual awakening process. Let's start with our leading lady, Isabel. Now, the weeping woman represents vitality. She's smart enough to be wary of the fast-talking Casanova. She has a rich life of her own, and she's vibrant enough that she can have 2 children. Now, just symbolically speaking, fertility and vitality, kind of a sliding scale, so that's kind of what we're talking about. She is the part of us that arouses and excites. She gets us out of bed. She motivates us to conquer. She's the spring in our step. But her fire is very much dependent on her creative force. Should something happen to it as we see, she's at risk of losing herself and becoming a husk of who she was. The river. When we say river, we mean the stream of consciousness and inspiration that we all have access to. It is our need to create and our uninhibited impulse to follow the white rabbit of ideas down the rabbit hole. And like any body of water, it should be allowed to flow without restriction. It must also be maintained and tended to, otherwise it might get dry or poisoned. Poison in this context means anything in society that deems our ideas trivial. It is the inability to concentrate, fear of failure, or anything that restricts this outward flow of creativity, of authenticity. The children. What do the children represent? How often do we call our projects our babies? We birth these ideas and we nurture them until they reach their fullest potential. It's as though they're a part of us, and that's what makes losing them so painful. Let's talk about Hector and the factory. Whatever version of the story we're talking about, these 2 elements symbolize the same thing. Pragmatism. This is the caution that society teaches us and its bias towards playing it safe. Think of the cliche, don't go to art school, be a doctor rhetoric. And on the surface, it promises security and possibly even luxury. Like, why take a risk when you can go for what's tried and true, right? And as seductive as these promises are, they are almost never delivered on. Now, pragmatism itself isn't a bad thing. It's a survival mechanism. It's a tool for us to navigate the world in a safe and efficient way. But it will never feed the soul. It may serve a purpose, but it will always take a backseat to the beating heart that is creative expression and authenticity. So how does this manifest in the connection between Isabel and Hector? In the first version of the story, Hector makes this big song and dance in the beginning of how he's ready to settle down, the false promise of security, and then does the opposite. Not only does he leave her, but he also threatens to take her precious babies. This is a classic example of doing what you're supposed to and not what you want to do, and being absolutely miserable for it. In such cases, a person's inner flame gets snuffed. They grow stale and tired, frustrated and overly cautious. They develop a distrust of their instincts and never take any leaps of faith. In the second version of the story, he stays with her and grows a factory over her sacred river. Her river, and later her boys who drink from it, grow poisoned and decrepit. So she ends up not only unfulfilled, but also sick. And so, with no means to fulfill her soul's wishes and sing the song she's meant to sing, madness seems inevitable. And this is not some story of how women be crazy. This is a story of what it means to lose your essence by starving your soul of creative expression. It'll probably not kill you right away, but it will gradually wear you down. The moral of this story is to find a balance between the responsibilities that we have and what our soul craves. That is the only way our children can be safe. Thank you so much for being on this journey. I'll catch you next time.